Good evening and welcome to tonight's studio. To the studio tonight even. I'm going to do some pyrography. I nearly found a ring. Nearly did some chainmail. But last minute decided do some more pyrography. So I then to scrabble about getting things together, and then pyrography. Lighting is a problem with pyrography because you're seeing that there is a glare. I can't see it. I can sort of see it if I look from where the camera is, but not really. Pyrography and glare is a problem. Mudkeepis, good evening. Welcome to the studio this evening. Nice to see you. I'm just explaining that with pyrography, glare is a problem because when you apply pyrography to wood, it goes smooth. I won't say glass smooth, but smooth enough that it reflects light. And the glare is a problem. Can't do much about it. Really can't do much about it. See, tipping it, as I might do on the easel for example, just makes it move. What I kind of need is possibly a lot more powerful light, a lot more diffuse, but yes, we've got what we've got. So this is Theo the cat, or the kitten, and he's almost, well, I was about to say the pyrography is almost finished, but it's not. There's a lot of shading to do on this. The basics are there, but there needs to be quite a bit more shading to be done on it, and but it's getting there. Thank you very much. I presume you mean the pyrography, but the kitten is as well. Kitten actually is just over a year old now actually, and he's not around. If he does pop in, I'll pick him up and show you. But he's ginger, which means this is this is close to colour, to a colour, almost close to being a colour pyrography for him. So let's do what to employ a cliche. Let's heat him up. That's a quote from a film. So heat the pyrographic tool up, although it is now hot, having just turned it on. Ooh, you love cats. Good! I like that. I like people that love cats. I love cats as well. Which is a good job because we've had quite a few. At one time we had 8 at the same time. 4 of them were kittens. That's because one moved in. So we had 3, one moved in, and promptly had 4 kittens. So, right, I am working from a reference picture which is just over there, but let's just, where am I going to start tonight? The things kind of need to overall go a bit darker because of the way this looks here. Just a bit. There's too much of a transition between the dark shadow bit and the light bit there. It's close, but not, but a bit too close. And I do need to colour this side of his muzzle a bit. So, let's colour this side of his muzzle a bit. Why have I got a pencil? Got a mark there. Not too bad on temperature. So on this bit here, I'm hoping to keep it as a fairly subtle change of colour. I want to change its shade, darken it slightly. And what I need to be a little bit careful of is that I don't accidentally make it go a lot darker. got a really subtle shade now, but I suspect it looks white on the video. But if it was actually wood coloured, if I hadn't actually coloured it, it would look even whiter than it currently does. So if you're not familiar, anybody that's watching that is, by the way, with pyrography, a little bit of a lesson on pyrography. The name itself is an old, well, it's got really old roots. It goes back to ancient Greek, where it's sort of made up from two words: pyro, meaning fire, and graphy or graphos, meaning pictures or writing rather, more than pictures. So fire writing is probably a literal translation of it, and that's kind of where I normally do the. But as you can see, I'm neither using fire nor am I writing. I think these days you might sort of more literally translate it as fire picture, as in graphos, graphics, sort of use that sort of intonation. So fire pictures, so pictures made with fire. Well, kind of getting there. I tend to, I tend to more describe it as painting with heat. So I'm using heat to cook wood. That's literally what I'm doing, is I'm cooking the wood. The process of heating it up like this is more stuff indeed. You ought to have thought by now of all the clickbait titles I have avoided using. But yeah, I describe it as painting with heat, because it's a bit like painting, and I'm using heat, but it's actually cooking. I'm cooking the wood. It is a very similar process to how you might make toast, where you use heat to toast bread. I'm toasting the wood. I'm using heat. It's a very similar process. So there's, in my case, there's never fire involved. In actual fact, this particular tool can't get hot enough to cause fire in just about any material that I can think of. I suppose if I put it into flash paper, then maybe I might cause something, but that's taking it a bit far. Even the other tool that I've got, it will actually glow orange, but it's really hard for it to actually generate fire. So these are quite safe-ish tools to use. And I'm using the word safe-ish there because this is hot. I would not touch this tip. It is at, I don't know, a few hundred degrees anyway. Probably 300 to 400 degrees. I'll get a temperature gauge out one of these days and actually measure it. But it's generated using obviously electricity, if you hadn't realised, and it's at a safe low voltage. And I would be quite happy to touch this, except for the fact that it's hot. But I do know when people have expressed in the past the scepticism that this is a safe low voltage, what I generally do is I unplug it like that and I get hold of both those ends. So that's perfectly safe. It's not mains voltage at all, which I'm glad about, because I'd be regretting doing that if it was. It's actually about the same voltage as a torch battery, so it's a relatively safe voltage. It just generates a lot of heat in the tip. Expensive? Yes. Well, There's two parts to this pyrography tool. I mean, there's this bit that you can see, and there's a bit here. Let me turn that off. Which you're not particularly seeing, but if I just bring it on a little bit, that's the control unit for it. This one happens to be made by a company called Razortip, and it's a dual system, so I've got a switch here to switch between two tools, which is quite useful for the way in which I work. So this isn't exactly a basic tool. I can't actually remember what the control unit is, but it let me say, I want to say in the order of 100 UK pounds, $130, $140. I don't know what that would be in euros, probably somewhere around the 120 euros. And then the pens, well, I describe them as pens, I don't actually know what they call them, are extra. There's two types, well, sort of two classes of pens and two types. There's a class of pen where the tips like this are fixed. I can't change that tip, it is fixed, it's welded in. There's this type here which has got the screws, which I can change the tip on. To be honest, I prefer these. Not being able to change the tips. There's electrically wise, it's a little bit better connection than this. You don't have the danger if this is a little bit loose of the tip popping off when you're not expecting it. And then there's thin bodied and thick bodied. The main difference in using them is this stays cooler than that does, and that's really only the difference. But this is, I think I saw one the other day, this particular one was about 18 UK pounds, so that's probably about 20 euros. If you, well, you can probably find them in Europe, actually, mud kippies, and with actually finding these in the UK was quite difficult, although I believe if you look below the stream window, I think it might mention there where I got it, or if not, perhaps on the website. But I did find in Europe, it's easier to get these pens in Europe than it is in the UK. But for me to order them from Europe, when I add postage on, it gets quite pricey. But so you might find them abroad easier. Now there are different. I'll turn this one back on. I chose this particular machine because the interchangeable tools, which make it easy. I mean, I can change a tool in a couple of seconds. That has its disadvantages though, and so that was one, and the range of tools that were available. And this particular machine, because it had the two outputs, so I can literally just throw a switch and I can pick the other pen up and use it, so I can have two connected at the same time. Some other machines do have a similar mechanism. It's like an add-on. It's really just a switch, just changing between two sockets. It's nothing particularly special. And even if the machine, if I'd used a different machine, I could have made that same sort of thing myself. The thing I don't like about this, which is kind of a disadvantage, is this cable. The ends on it, this end is actually an audio connector. It's not really meant for the high current that these pens take. And it's one of the things that happens, because audio connectors aren't really intended to sort of plug in and out a lot. This gets a little bit loose, and what I have to do is to use a sharp object and tighten up the connection in there, because if not, you lose heat, effectively lose heat in this connection here. This gets warm, and it's not. That's the one thing I don't like about this. If they'd used a different connector more suited to power, I'd be a lot happier with this thing. But the other thing about this is there are a number of different machines that work in a similar way. They have a similar style tool, and as you can perhaps see why I like this one is the way I'm holding it. I can hold this like a pencil. I can literally use it like a pencil, and especially if I talk about this one, I can easily write with this in my normal handwriting. So, you know, from that point of view, I can get really close and easily controlled. There are a number of other machines on the market that don't know if you're familiar with soldering irons, but they heat the tip up in a different way, and they're generally sort of a fairly large tool, easily at least as long as this, but you have to hold it back here. When I don't know about you, it's practice, but I find it, I don't want to turn that off. I would find trying to use something like this relatively difficult if I'm holding it back here with quite a big handle. So some people like them, some people don't. I like these, some people don't. It's a matter of just what you feel like using. I mean, I'm used to using soldering irons, so I know what that alternative style of heating device feels like. Not for pyrography, but I've used it for soldering, which is not quite the same thing, but is sort of a similar sort of idea. So you kind of look for what you want and what you want in a tool. The others are cheaper. I mean, this isn't a cheap tool by any means. It's not something I'd particularly recommend for a beginner, just because it's expensive, and if you don't like it, you just kind of have wasted a couple of £100, euros, dollars in doing it. Whereas the other ones that you generally see, they're available in hobby stores at least, you know, they're 20, 30 euros, dollars, pounds. It's less, you regret it less if you decide you don't like it, shall we say. And you can always progress to something like this, and there are times when those tools work really well, and for certain things they work really well. I prefer this style. I find it easier. I mean, I've got more control over the heat, for example, for doing shading work like this, and this is my preferred pyrography style. The others, I have seen people produce absolutely fantastic art of this style using the other style of tool. It's not the tool that stops you doing it, it is literally your skill in using it. I find it easier to learn a skill using this tool, that's just me. But the other ones I see most used by people to do one of two art styles, and that is the one which is just purely like an incline, so they're using it really hot and really quickly just doing like an outline. So cat, you know, eyes, nose, mouth, job done. Or the other style is similar to that, but they do a little bit of shading, and you might get two colour shading. Because it's so hot, the way in which you have to control your shading with an iron which is really hot is to move it fast, and that takes practice and skill. Okay, now you won't see one like this, but I mean, you've got a soldering iron, you can use a soldering iron for this. I just wouldn't use the same tip that you solder with. It's hot enough to do this sort of thing with, and yeah. Yeah, I love this style, this style of stuff. It's just me. I am more sort of. I describe this actually as photorealistic. It isn't, obviously. There's no way you confuse this with a photo. But I describe it as photorealistic because it doesn't have an outline. And you look at a photograph; they don't have outlines. Just different styles. I really ought to have an experiment with outlines. I've done some odd pure black and white. I think I've got a box somewhere which has got from Zelda the Triforce, which is just pure black and white. You know, it's all right. I enjoy this sort of stuff. But Raspberry Pi stuff. This camera here that you can see in the top right hand corner. That's a Raspberry Pi. It's a Pi 2 with a Noir camera on it, Noir camera on it. which I'm sort of playing about with. I tend to play about with Arduinos myself, or those style of micros. Doing things with those, the Arduinos or the ESP8266 is what I've been playing with most recently. As I'll tell you what, let me see if I can find it. I'll just have a quick dash over the other side of the desk. No, unfortunately I can't find it, but you might recognise that. He says, having got some others that weren't what I thought they were. No, can't find it. Okay. The studio is still in a little bit of an upside down and stuff isn't quite where it is, but I mean that was done with this pen, so I was writing. You might, well, I don't know. How well do you know your Hyrulean alphabet? I shall just leave that there for a little bit. See if you can realise what that is, and I shall do some more with this fella. Okay, so probably the best thing for me to do at this point is to add some more colour around here. Too hard. Well, it isn't, but you could call it my business card. Does that help you realise what it might be? What it says is arrogant art. Now, whilst I quite like playing Zelda, I don't claim to know the alphabet. I must admit, I looked that up when I did it. What I want to do here is there's a bit of an abrupt translation there, so I actually want to just blend a little bit. There is kind of a sharp transition with the highlight, but it doesn't look good when it's like this. So when you're applying pyrography, the colour of the wood is directly proportional to the amount of heat that you apply to that particular point in the wood. Yeah. Oh, I should have left it there for a little bit, shouldn't I, to let you have a go. I've got another two. I just don't know where they are, along with the small box. What I thought I was picking it was the other two, but I actually ended up picking these up. It would have been a nice task. I keep thinking what I ought to do is maybe put something like that just in the shop so that people can have a couple of words on there, you know, like a name tag or something like that, and have it handmade. But yeah, so what I'm saying is the amount of colour is directly proportional to the amount of heat. But the amount of heat is dependent on a couple of factors, 3 factors indeed. The heat of the tool itself, how long I hold it in a particular place, is another factor, and that's how long over a particular period of time, because I can hold this in one place and move it slowly, or I can move it very rapidly but over the same path lots of times and apply exactly the same amount of heat in exactly the same amount of time, and I'll get exactly the same amount of colour within reason. So there are, sometimes you'll see me working slowly, and sometimes you'll see me working really sort of fast. And what I'm tending to do, partly I tend to work fast when I forget that I'm doing pyrography, it would be more how I'd work with a pencil, but sometimes I do that because I don't want to apply a lot of heat all in one go. I want to gradually just build up the colour. And if I do it quite quickly like this, I can see very small steps and I can stop. The spruce is a beauty. That's that one, isn't it? Yeah. Just one on one stream. I was just... I can't remember why. I just that was the first one I did. I think let's just try drawing a tree, a palm tree. I think that was the first one. Was it the palm tree? I can't actually remember now. And then I thought, well, I've got these other 3. Let's just see what other trees we can do. And the poplar, the palm tree, the spruce, as you say, and then sort of just a generic sort of tree. I was just practicing different ways of doing it, and then I quite like them all, to be honest. It just surprised me. Well, it always surprises me when I'm doing things like this, just kind of like how sometimes things happen almost by accident. Sort of the texture on here is partly down to the wood, and just how nicely it sort of shows up. It's kind of like old sepia prints as well, so there's a kind of a resemblance to those, and I've kind of been playing with the idea of maybe doing, this is sort of in that style, but sort of maybe trying something that would be you'd almost automatically recognise as an old-time print, sort of like, I don't know, old American West buildings, or the cart and horses. Florida. What, Florida as it is now, or was it used to be a few weeks ago? Because I'm not quite sure they'd look like that quite anymore. I think one of the sort of inspirations for that was probably I'd just done an engraving just before it in a coffee jar, where I'd got a coffee jar and I'd gone, what do I do on this? And let's do something coffee themed. So I'd done a Greek cafe table, and just the table, on a cobbled sort of a crazy paved sort of base, and then I'd done well, the word coffee on one side of it. So the other two sides, one was a coffee cup with coffee in it and steam coming out the top, and the third one was a beach at sunset with a seat and a palm tree. And I think probably, I'm not quite sure which one came first, as it used to be. Yeah, unfortunately for those people out there, it's we've had a bit of a hard time, I guess. Now that colour's better. Definitely better, I think. Now this is an extremely versatile tool because this is what they call a shader. Because you use it for shading. And it's called a flat shader because the bottom of it's flat. You can get what they call spoon shaders, where the bottom is like a spoon. Actually, sometimes the spoon shaders are potentially better or easy to use for beginners than flat shaders. But I can also turn this that way around, and I get an extremely fine line. I mean that's as fine as I can get with the other tool, which you might think would give me fine lines. This thing here. But with this is about at least half the size, or even a third, and I can get really sort of hairline fine lines with this. And these days I'm tending to use this tool more than just about any other tool that I've got in terms of the pyrography tools that I've got. And I've got probably about half a dozen of these now. So a spoon shader, the writing, this flat shader. I've got a different size flat shader. I've got a knife, which is useful for doing other things like cutting plastic as well as working on pyrography, and would be good if I was working on things like gourds as well, because you can cut with it if you need to do so. I forgot what the fifth one is, but the other style of pyrography you sometimes get, it's related to sort of the outline, and it is most often used with the other style of tool, and that is you can get brands or stamps almost, which go in the end. So you might get a leaf shaped stamp, for example, so when it's hot you put it down, you get a leaf, or you get a letter or whatever it is you've put on the end. And there are people who do those, and they might sort of put happy birthday and then a balloon and a few leaves around the outside, and do that sort of style of pyrography as well. The knife one, I very rarely use it actually. I mean, I did partly get it because I thought it's got a really sharp, not really sharp as in like a razor, but sharp compared to even this, so I'd be able to do really fine lines with it. In actual fact I don't. It cuts too deep into the wood and you don't really get the effect that you're after. But I did think the other thing I do is airbrushing. So sometimes I use masks or shields as they're called to help with shielding, stopping the spray going where you don't want it in a particularly detailed area. And they're made out of mylar, and with a hot knife you can cut those as well, so you can cut additional shapes and things. I thought that might be useful, but you need the rest of the, you need the control unit to go with it as well. But yeah, actually I never thought about using it for sort of plastic model making and plastic cutting, model kit type working. I'd never thought about that. Thank you for the idea. You can get them, don't know they'll fit on the end of a soldering iron. Depends on the type of soldering iron you've got. But for the type, the type that you get in the hobby shops, which is like a large soldering iron handle. I know I've seen those that have a knife tip as well, so you can get hot knives. So they're a bit like a hobby knife, which then gets heated. But I've no experience of those tools at all. So I've never used one. My soldering, the soldering iron I've got is the soldering station, so it has temperature control, but the actual handpiece itself resembles somewhat like these. And before I bought this, I was holding that in my hand and cold and going, could I draw with this? Which is why I chose this in the end. There's quite a few. They all have, when you look at them, you have people that will swear by these and people who swear at them. The Peter Child's machine, same thing. People swear at them or swear by them. The thing that with the other style that is an advantage to them is they generate the heat using an actual heater element, and they heat like a metal core which the tip, whatever it is in contact with, so it conducts quite a lot of heat down to the tip, and when you put it down on the wood, they've enough power in them to keep that tool heated. When I put this down on the wood, it cools down. This is electrically heated. It's using the resistance it's passing a current through the tip, and the resistance makes it get hot. And if I put this down on the wood cools the tip down a little bit, and it then stabilizes. The machine is enough to keep it hot, but that initial touchdown with this means that if I'm not careful, I've been talking now, waving this about in the air, if I put this down and don't move it very, very quickly, I'll get a dark brown blob, because all of a sudden this has got hotter than normal and dumps a lot of heat straight into the wood and cooks it all in one go. And as I move it, then the heat goes down, so the temperature on this tip does vary a bit, and that is one thing I kind of would like to find a machine where it was somehow able to react to that. So when I'm waving this about, this is getting hot, it would stop heating it. When I put it down, it would suddenly apply enough heat so that it didn't dip, the temperature. So I'd have a consistent temperature all the time. Whether some of the other machines are better, don't know. But that's something that, having now used it, that's a question that I would ask if I wanted to get another machine. How good is it at doing that? And that's one of the, as you use it, you learn your own techniques, but you learn your own questions, your own styles about things. I mean, I like the thing about this is it's got this foam grip, and without it, because one of my other pens didn't have one originally, I forgot to put it on. But these actually the bodies actually get quite hot. This one isn't too bad using it like this, but if I start working like this, more vertically, the heat actually does go up inside this body, and that's one of the reasons why it's a thick body on this, and it's got air holes at the top, so that the heat comes out and it actually creates a cooling draft going through the pen. But this foam also stops your fingers being close to that hot barrel and hot air that's in it, and you can actually continue to work quite a bit longer, as well as the thickness helping a bit. But if I start working like that, as I do sometimes, after about 5 minutes, shall we say, it becomes uncomfortable to carry on for a while, because the heat on that tip is coming up straight onto these fingers. It's like putting your fingers over a flame. Yeah, I find, I mean, it also allows me to sort of grip it. You know, I can squeeze a little bit if I want to make sure I've got hold of it, or I can hold it relaxed, and it's more comfortable because of that, and it's slightly larger than it is, so I'm not getting cramped from holding a tiny, what would be like a pencil. If you hold a pencil for long enough, I don't know if you do it, but I find that my fingers, because of the small gap, my fingers tend to give a little bit of a cramp. This is big enough that I don't get that, but everybody's different, you know. Right, so this is, let me have a look at that on screen. Yeah, it's still a bit white. That's actually still a bit on screen. I mean, here on screen, I'm looking at that on screen, which I do often because it's the equivalent of me stepping about 6 feet back to look at the picture. For some reason, the cameras have a more distant look. That's really pronounced there. Yeah, here in person, it's actually not as pronounced a contrast. That's interesting. Let me just push them off the side of this, and I'm just wondering if it's just because it's the way the light's reflecting with the camera. Nah. He looks a little bit like he's wearing a cap or something. Now, interestingly, I've got two monitors, and one actually shows it slightly different to the other. Oh well. Ultimately, this is something that you see in person on the end of a video camera, so that's kind of more important. Yeah, well, he was sat on a chair looking up at me. This is from a photograph that I took. Oh, that's the original image. And yeah, he was looking up at me, as they do. That's sort of cute. I'm pretty, and I kind of look at you. Right. So, but yeah, this area is still much too bright. I need to now carry on the colouring across there, I think. So we'll do that across the top of his head. Now you see that I just made a dark mark there because I've not had this on the wood. When I first, you might have seen me blowing on it earlier, and that is to cool it down so that immediately when I touch it down like this, I don't suddenly get a dark mark that I'm not expecting. So it takes away that sudden dump of heat onto the wood. Now, when you're doing pyrography, the wood that you're using matters as well, and it kind of matters for two reasons. One is its colour, and it's a bit like I liken it to sort of, if you've got a black pencil and you try drawing on black paper, you can't see it very well. But if you do on white paper, it stands out, and if you do it on grey paper, it stands out less. Pyrography is kind of the same, in that the darker the wood I use, the less colour range I've got available, because the lightest you can have is no pyrography at all. So if your wood is quite dark, then that's your lightest colour, which represents white. And people do see it as white even on dark coloured wood. And obviously, you know, this sort of thing here, for example, is about the darkest that I can get without going really silly and carbonising it, and that's a terrible thing to do on this sort of image. And so, you know, if you took ebony, for example, it's a really difficult wood to apply pyrography to, just because you can almost not see the pyrography on it, ebony being black. And so some of the lighter woods are poplar, which is what this is, and oh, I forgot what the other one is. I've got some over there and I've forgotten what it's called. But poplar is the one I tend to use most. There is one that's slightly whiter, and there's another wood that gets used quite a bit. It's not quite as white as this, but it's called basswood, or it's called basswood in the States a lot. Over in Europe, it's slightly mixed, but it gets called European lime wood. Is its name in Europe, but it's now also getting known by the American name, which is basswood. Okay, I've never actually picked any up. I mean, it's a really hard wood as well, for carving purposes. So I've kind of looked at it before in the past and thought I'd kind of like to carve something in that, but it's not an easy wood to carve because it is quite hard. And then you have the sort of the difficulty with relief carving, which is what I tend to do, of the fact that it's because of the colour and the consistency of the colour, seeing the carving actually can be quite difficult. Basswood is used quite a bit for this because of the other property of it, which poplar has as well, which is it's the density of the wood. You know wood grows in rings, so and you if you want to know how old a tree is, you count the rings, and that is sort of the soft outer wood and the harder inner wood. And the seasons, the winter seasons cause the hard outer wood to form, and then the summer seasons have a softer wood which carries the sap. And if you use something like pine, then the soft bit is really soft and the hard bit's really hard. And when you try and apply pyrography to it, two things happen. The soft takes the colour really quickly, and the hard bit doesn't take colour hardly at all, and so you end up with stripes. The other thing that happens is the softwood shrinks because it's been cooked. It shrinks away from the tip, and you end up with sort of bridges and valleys, and trying to get a consistent colour across that is a pain in the neck. Basswood, poplar, birch, and that's what I was thinking of. Birch. This is birch, not poplar. The density of those hard and soft bits are almost the same, so you get a nice consistent colouring, as you can see, across the grain of the wood, which is why those are particular popular. Birch. Yeah, this is actually, well, this is the top surface of this is birch, and I have some poplar. This is birch. The poplar is slightly whiter than the birch. This actually is plywood, which I tend to use plywood because the construction makes it ideal for pyrography. Don't know if you do any cooking. I ask because sometimes people don't. You know how if you sort of fry meat, for example, it shrinks on that side and curls up. Yeah, so the cooked side shrinks and you get that sort of curve. Pyrography is the same. I'm cooking the surface of the wood and it shrinks, and it actually causes the wood to warp. But with plywood, the way plywood is made is they kind of, at its simplest level, they have one layer of wood that way, then a layer of wood at 90 degrees, then one, and they alternate like that depending on how many layers. The more expensive ones go around in sort of many steps, but because of that construction like that, the alternate layers counteract the warping of the surface and reduce it quite a bit. So this bit of wood is slightly warped, but if I did this on a solid piece this thick, it would be rocking quite seriously. You have to sort of get to something like about 1/3 of an inch to 1/2 an inch before you don't get warping. And of course, the thicker the piece of the wood in any given size, the more expensive it is. So the plywood is quite a cheap way of doing it. Although it is surprisingly difficult to get plywood, birch plywood. Most plywoods that you get in home stores and things like that are intended for construction. They don't really care about the wood. They do have grades, but even the best grade is pine faced usually, and pine's not a good wood. Birch is for sort of more slightly finished work, and then it gets graded, AA being the best grade, which generally speaking has no knots in it, or very little knots in it, and it's a generally clear wood. Like this is sort of what they call a clear wood. And poplar's even harder to find, and in this, basswood is just not available as plywood, so you have to buy the thicker blocks for that. And but it's still so, you know, trying to find a decent supplier sometimes can be quite difficult. I'm trying to think what supplier I found for these actually supplies it for laser cutting. That's actually what, daft as it sounds, laser cutting has a similar requirement to pyrography. The whiter it is, and the clearer it is, and the fact that it's birch or poplar with, you know, the consistent grain makes laser cutting better. So a laser cutter supplier supplies wood for laser cutting is often a good supplier for this sort of stuff. Who'd have thought? I didn't think until I came across it, and it's kind of obvious once you know. Right, and I do have a real habit with pyrography, especially of when I start talking I stop doing. Yeah, you see, this being an audio connector, that tip there is a bit hard. I need to get in and close the connection a bit, so it doesn't feel quite as loose. It's the resistance which you get because it's not a very tight connection that makes it heat up, and so I need to sort of close the gaps a little bit so it bites a little bit more when this plugs in, and then it doesn't get as warm there. I haven't yet, is the best thing I can say to that mud kippis. I have put wax on this for a couple of these. That one, for example, and that one. These two have got wax on. That one hasn't. Yeah. So I was I wanted to see what it looks like. I'm of two minds. Personally, I kind of like the look of the unfinished wood. But I mean, it is subject to, you know, ultraviolet light, for example. Sunlight will cause it to fade. Cause it to fade. What it tends to do is make the wood you haven't applied pyrography to go coloured. I mean, the sun is cooking the wood, so you can kind of understand it sort of goes darker. And eventually, you know, the contrast reduces because it darkens this and things like that. So it is something I'm kind of thinking about. The idea of waxing is to stop dust ingraining itself, you know, embedding itself onto the surface. So this is wood grain, so wood actually sort of dust can get embedded into it, especially if you try and rub it off. Which is something I keep having to remember when I've used trace down, is to use a brush. So if you decide to use a pencil to put an outline on, when you erase it, use a clean eraser and use a brush to get rid of the erasing things. Don't rub it off with your fingers. I learned that in the past. Trace down's a similar thing. I've got I've got a whisker here, which is going to be a whisker just to hide the fact that some of the trace down actually got embedded in the wood grain. But yeah, oiling it would do a similar job. Of course, you kind of want to have an oil which doesn't really colour the wood, so you don't want any stain in the oil. And I'm kind of thinking a lot of oils do have sort of a stain in them, even if it's only the natural stain of the oil itself. So I don't know, I mean, it just depends on what you like the look of, I guess. And I have been thinking about lacquer. I'd want to, it's something I call clear coat. I'd want one that was matte rather than shiny, because I mean this is shiny anyway, as you can see because of the reflections of the light. So it's I've kind of been thinking about it. Some matte varnish, I suppose, but I'm not thinking of the varnish that you'll go out and get in a home store. I'm kind of thinking more about what would be a varnish, though, a spray varnish, I guess, or a spray lacquer as you're describing, which is probably the better description. And I'd describe it as clear coat because that's when I'm airbrushing. That's what I'd be describing it as if I was buying it clear coat. And I can get that in matte and clear, so you know, I know it's not going to change the colour of the surface, and varnishes tend to be thick. Lacquer clear coat is quite thin, and so you don't get any sort of distortions as well. So it's something I've been thinking about. I've got some scraper board which I want to put a clear coat over so that you don't scratch it. And I keep meaning to get some, and then I'll try it on one of these, you know, maybe sort of do one of these and just see what it looks like and then decide from there. But it's yeah, it's a perfectly valid thing. I think it's probably a good idea for the long-term health of the image to actually put some sort of protective coating on it, so even then the UV damage is less, even if it does get UV. I don't know if you've watched any pyrography on YouTube or anything like that, Mudkippis, but I don't know if you have, you might be surprised at just how long this is taking. But apart from the fact that I keep stopping, but it's there's kind of two reasons. The first one is often on the internet they use time lapse, which makes everything look faster. But there are some artists that can work with a really high heat on the tool, and they control it by the speed at which they work. And they, with a lot of practice, they can work with a really hot tool, and therefore, work at what would be 3-4 times my speed, because they're working with a hotter tool and with better skill. And but generally speaking, I know people have been really surprised at just how long this takes. I mean, the wood isn't instantly flashing to a colour, or at least not. I'm glad it's not. And it's not instantly going black, and that even if I held it down, it won't instantly go black at this heat. I can turn it up, but it doesn't. I'm not trying to get it to go black, so the fact that it doesn't actually is good. But it is something that pyrography takes time to do. And the toast analogy actually is one that just recently came to mind. Actually, whilst I was streaming, I was describing it, and it's kind of the same thing for toast. As soon as you put your toast under or in the toaster, it doesn't instantly go brown. It takes a few minutes, and pyrography is the same. So there you are, you learned something tonight. Pyrography is like making toast. One of the nice things about doing cats like this is if I make a mistake and accidentally put a dark mark, say there, I just go, well, yeah, he's got a marking there that I forgot to put in. So you'd never know the difference. Even if I showed you the photograph, you'd probably never know the difference. But it's one of those interesting things that when you're doing real life objects like this, mistakes can easily be hidden. You can start practicing with toast. You literally can. I haven't done it with this, but I could take a slice of bread and I could use this. I'll turn it up a bit, but I could actually apply pyrography to toast. One of the interesting things with toast, by the way, if you take something, I don't know, like the top of a pencil, which is rounded, and you press slightly on a loaf of on a slice of bread, so you squash it slightly, or a reasonable amount, but you squash it. When you put that in your toaster, that will come out lighter than the rest of the bread. So you can actually sort of apply reverse pyrography to toast. And so if you want to put somebody's name on a piece of toast, for example, get your bread, something reasonable, you need to be reasonable so it'll run rather than tearing the bread. Press down so you create a reasonable sort of indentation. Write the name, put it in the toaster. You'll get the name showing up whiter on the toast afterwards, and that's because with it being more dense, it doesn't absorb as much heat. So you can draw hearts and all sorts of things on toast. They're a fun sort of thing to play with occasionally. That's kind of looking better. This is much too bright compared with that, because that's the highlight side. So this is the next area over here to do some work with. Let's cool that tip down. There you go, you see. You can try it out and surprise them. Of course, you can buy fancy toast stamps, which are essentially just do the same thing, but they're already. If you use cookie cutters, for example, if you turn it over so you don't have the sharp side down, you have the top side. You can press down. Careful not to cut yourself on the other side. You can use those as shapes, so they will create the indentation for you. So you can actually, so if you've got a nice cookie cutter shape that you want it, you can do the same thing. But they sort of do sell things around at sort of reasonably expensive prices for what they are, really, to do something similar. Yeah. And there you are, you see, you get value for money on this channel. All these ideas that you never thought of, and then you become highly artistic for something, and there's quite a lot of people, shall we say, where if you did give them a piece of toast like that, they'd be more impressed than showing them something like this. That kind of go, yeah, well, it's a picture, so what? Oh, wow, you did that with toast. Now the real, when you're working with this style of pyrography, one of the skills that you end up having to develop, I won't say master because I haven't, is consistent colouring and shading. So like if I'm working my way across here, I kind of want it to be a solid colour, as in it's the same colour all the way across. I don't want lines showing it and things like that. I want it to look like, I don't know, you maybe painted it, as in painting with heat. It's really isn't as easy as it might sound. It is rather like trying to do the same thing with a pencil, where you might tip it on its side perhaps and draw a line, and you've got to, when you do it with pyrography or with the pencils, you don't actually try and butt up right to the edge of the line you've just done, you actually overlap it. So part of it is there's got two layers of pencil on it, and then your third line you overlap the bit that you didn't of your second line, so you keep sort of overlapping. That way you actually get a better, more consistent coverage. And it's the same with pyrography. You kind of got to go partially over what you've already done. But you still have to sort of apply the same colouring, etc. You know, with a pencil, if you press one line harder than the next, it would definitely show up. Pressing harder with pyrography doesn't really do a great deal, but slowing down, for example, for one line more than another will make it darker, and that shows up. But so you know, for this style, sort of developing that technique of being able to keep a consistent colour as you go across, and certain things also, it's the way in which the direction in which you work matters. I'm starting here working that way. If I start there and work this way, it's actually quicker. And the reason it's quicker is because as I'm doing this bit, I'm working with mainly the front half of this tool, and the back half is kind of preheating the wood. So when I come to do the next line down, the wood is partially preheated, so I don't have to apply as much, so it goes on faster. If I do it the other way, I'm working with the tip of the tool, and the bit I'm just about to go onto actually hasn't had any preheat at all, so it's working from cold. So it's slower. Now sometimes you want it to do it that way, and sometimes you don't. And this is where you have to get to know your tool as well, because I'm aware that the heating on this tool isn't even. There's a spot at the back of this one here which is a lot hotter than anywhere else, and this edge is hotter than the tip, and I can use that to advantage, but occasionally sometimes I forget and will put this down and I get a mark that I didn't intend. So you do also have to learn your tools as you're doing this. You know, the different parts of the tool will react differently, and you use them slightly differently as well. I mean, when I'm trying to get a consistent colour like this, I'm trying to use as much of the tool as I can, because if I use it more flat, I get it's a bit like drawing with a pencil. If you draw with the side, if you try to colour in a block with the side, you get a more consistent, even colouring than if you use the point and try and colour everything in on the point using just the point. Now I am actually after quite subtle colour changes here, and they are not quite sure how visible they're going to be to the camera, but what is a relatively, might look like a relatively subtle colour change actually has a big impact at this end. I can probably get something approaching like 16 levels of colour, different shades in doing this, and it's not particularly easy to cover because I've never actually gone and done a grayscale, start light and get to the dark and then count how many I've done, but you are able to play all sorts of visual games with this. I can have something at this side which is exactly the same colour as it is at this side, but because it's near something dark it looks lighter. Over here it looks darker because it's next to something light. So your colours are always, or your shades are always relative to what's around it, and so it ends up looking like you've probably got hundreds of different shades, which is useful at times. The other thing that you have to be careful of, especially in doing large blocks of colour like this, is as I'm doing each row of, as I'm working my way, I have to be careful not to start and stop in exactly the same position, because if I do that, I'll end up with a visible line where I started and one when I finished. And then it kind of looks like somebody sort of, I don't know, taken a razor across or painted a black stripe. And then you've got to sort of go back in and fade them out. So when you're filling in large blocks of colour like this, you do some short lines, some long lines, some stop early, stop late, start, and just basically make sure every line that you do is a different length. That way you get a really jagged edge, which then blends in a lot easier. You will need a manual to use one. I know what you mean, but it becomes instinctual after a little bit. I mean, I keep forgetting about what I've just said then, but I only forget once in any particular pyrographic period. It's a lot of what I've been saying applies to using a pencil if you draw, and yet you kind of, because you build that up a lot slower, if you like, and you've sort of developed your own techniques as you work, you don't notice things like this. Something because I'm telling you all of these things that you already knew, but you hadn't realised that they applied to pyrography, and you're kind of thinking as pyrography as something different, that you kind of sort of thinking along those lines of, hey, I'm going to need something that's going to tell me how to do all of these things. You already know how to do it. It's just the ink is heat. The ink's coming out of the wood, not out the end of the pen. Really? It's true. I mean, after the stream, I'd say after the stream, of course, but anytime you like, get yourself a pen set and just try some of the things I've been talking about. You'll find that they are things that you probably knew and you can do with a pencil, and it really is the same sort of thing. So like I'm saying there, start and stop at the same place. If you try and do that, you'll find you get a, as you're going, you end up like filling in a rectangular box, and you can create a rectangular box. Yeah, if you then stagger them randomly, which is really hard to be random, but randomly, it doesn't look as boxy. It just looks like you've started to get a blotch of colour, which is what you're after. Well, it's recorded for 2 weeks, so you can always go back and have another look at the VOD on Twitch, of course. And unfortunately, due to work-related matters, I'm probably not going to be broadcasting for the next couple of weeks. So you've got some chance to go back and look at the VOD again and try out some things. I mean, it's as I'm doing this, and I'll say obviously, but it's I am not an expert in this. I am learning, and I'm sort of telling you what I'm discovering as you, the general audience, as I'm discovering or as I'm learning, or I'm describing what I'm doing and why I'm doing it that way. Whether it's the right way, I usually don't think that there actually is a right way, but there are different ways of doing it. I tend to distrust people that say it has to be done this way. Well, very often it doesn't. Yeah. Well, there's only 2 weeks on Twitch. Actually, there's some pyrography on YouTube at the moment. Yeah, if you watch one of those a night, I'll be back streaming before you've watched them all, I think. But yeah, I'm sort of describing as I'm learning. For example, some of the techniques that I'm using with this pen, for example, loosely relate to techniques that I've learned airbrushing. That bit about I mentioned earlier, when I put this down, if I'm not careful, I create that black, darker blob because of the heat dump suddenly at the tip. And it's because you put it down and then start moving. And if you think about it, it's stationary for a period of time before you start moving. So not only the fact that it's hot, it's the fact that you leave it, relatively speaking, in one place for quite a while. You get that less if you move the tip and touch it down while you're moving and then lift off. So it's moving when it actually hits the wood, and it's not in the same place. So even though it's dumping a lot of heat, it's still that's spread out over quite a length, relatively speaking. That's something a technique which I actually learned airbrushing, because with airbrushing, if you do the same thing, you want to draw, shade something in. If you stop, press the airbrush to get paint flowing, then start moving, you get a blob. The same thing will happen with the spray can. If you use the spray can, if you hold it, press and then move, you get this great big blob of paint. Whereas if you move the can or the airbrush, and as you get to where you want it to start, you press the thing down so paint starts coming out and carry on smoothly, you get a nice line of paint. You don't get the big blob. And when you lift off your finger at the end, you keep moving, and you don't get a blob at the end either. This is kind of the same. You move, touch down, lift off, and then stop. If you put it down, start moving, lift off, you get a dark patch at the start and end. Oh, that was you yesterday, was it, Mudkippers? I got an email, of course. Of course, your YouTube name and your Twitch name do not match. You need an airbrush too. Well, I can tell you about airbrushing. I've got a few over there, and it's something I intend to do on stream again. Well, not again, on stream, but just not yet. I want to get some of the other projects, as I said last night, out of the way. Same sort of mechanic it is, yes, that's right. Yeah, as I said, you've just been describing. It applies. So some of the techniques apply to using a pencil. Some of the techniques apply to cooking. Some of the similar sort of things apply. Airbrush has a similarity in that respect, because an airbrush paint or spray can paint is quantity in a particular time. That's how much coverage, and the brown here is quantity of heat in a particular time. So that's why they relate to each other. One of the things I'm going to try at some point in the future, and it won't be soon, but I have a piece of wood which is about a yard long, or a metre long, and whatever the corresponding height is, it's probably A0 in actual size, I can't remember, but I'm still trying to think of a scene that I can do on a piece of wood that big in pyrography. That'd be something that's going to take months to do, but it's probably going to have to be a landscape type view of some kind, an actual thing. It's not going to be like a pussycat that size. It's going to have to be sort of buildings and stuff like that. But I'm currently studying this because what I'm seeing here is I can see his nose and his muzzle in a sort of a three-dimensional sort of view, but the top of his head here looks to be the wrong shape, and it's the shading that's doing that. And what I'm just looking at now is trying to decide what shading needs to change to give me that forehead bit that they have before it curls over the top. At the moment it goes from the bridge of his nose straight backwards. It doesn't look to have that bump that the cats have. Yeah, it would be some big scene. I really can't think of what would do that. Oh, well, I was going to say what would do it justice, but it'd have to be, with something that big, it would probably have to be something quite epic, shall we say, in terms of views. You know, it couldn't just be, you know, a couple of fields with a tree in it. You know, it's going to have to be something like, I don't know, let's say the New York skyline, or I don't know, Santorini, for example. You know, the caldera shots that you get in the holiday magazines, and or you know, something that's got a fair amount in it, really. So I'm kind of trying to, or, you know, London skyline, or I don't even think. You know, I could think of maybe doing a big building, but you know, St. Paul's Cathedral, for example. But it's too big a piece of wood to do a single thing on like that. It's got to be something, you know, wider, more sort of spacious is the word I'm using. But it's, you know, it's more sort of, I want something that's that big, you know, it's that actually looks big. Looks to cover sort of, you know, 1,000 miles, if you know what I mean. It needs to be something of that sort of idea. So how do I shade this? We've got light, which is up roughly where my hand is up here, and it's coming in this way, which is why we've got the highlight here, and we actually have a highlight across here as well. Now that's going to mean the top of his head's probably going to, from his forehead backwards, he's probably going to be slightly darker than the bit from the bridge of his nose to the top of his forehead. This bit here, it's probably going to be lighter because that's more lit, except of course he's got a ginger stripe down there. When you're working monochrome, sometimes you can, especially if you're working from a colour photograph, you can get fooled by the colour. The colours give you a wrong perspective of how light or dark something is. And doing a ginger pussycat in the ginger tones of Pyrography makes that even worse, because it really looks like there's a dimple in his head here almost, and it now doesn't look right. Now that I've had to darken that, maybe I just need to darken this a little bit, because it was looking okay earlier. And of course there's no undo, and I can't erase anything that I've done. I have to, if I've made this too dark, the only way I've got of fixing that is to make what's around it darker, so that because as I said earlier, it's relative. You know, this will look lighter if I make this bit darker, and that's how you fix overcolouring. So if you make something too dark, that's how you fix it. You can't scrape it away, you can't sand it away. If you try, what you end up with is a surface which, when you try and put colour back over it, doesn't look the same, and it's always visible as having been scraped or sanded. All of this stuff about pyrography that you didn't really want to know. Yeah, okay, so let's just try. I mean, I've got a little bit of leeway to try doing things. I mean, there reaches a point at which, you know, you've made things too dark and it just doesn't work anymore. And at that point, you can, all right, I've learned something. It will be filed under the should have learnt quicker section of the storage, but you know, it's nobody ever did anything 100%. The only thing is, of course, with me doing it on stream and me explaining what it is and why it is all these mistakes I'm telling you about. Normally I wouldn't. In fact, have I got it here? He says, just looking for something. No, I don't. I do have a pyrographic image on practice wood that I have, which I've used in the past to illustrate the fact that there is a mistake on it, and it's a highly visible mistake once you know what the mistake is, but most people can't see it. And I use it as an illustration of kind of how artists, if you like, make mistakes and don't tell you. If I don't tell you I've made a mistake, you don't know. And the picture I was thinking of has got one of those, and I didn't realise I'd made the mistake until afterwards. And very few people have actually spotted it until I've told them. And then they kind of really, you know, oh yeah. And so, but because of the way in which I'm doing pyrography here, which is sort of part of the idea is, you know, conversing and you know, having conversations with you guys. It's a bit like being in a class. Yeah, I'm not exactly teaching. I'm sort of, actually I suppose I am a little bit, but I'm not doing more that sort of formal teaching. It's kind of more just explaining what I'm doing as I'm learning it. You have the opportunity to learn. I'm kind of, the reason I'm kind of doing is, let's say you were interested in trying it, you saw pyrography, you said, hey, this would be fun. One of the things that I found when I started looking at pyrography to do, which is a few years ago now, I looked on YouTube. There's lots of people doing the time lapse. Hey, look, somebody can do a beautiful picture in 30 minutes. Yeah, right. And a few of them will go, this is how you draw a cat's face. You draw the eye like, and the eye's wrong. You draw an eye like this. And my first question is, why do you draw an eye like that? And of course, you don't get that from a YouTube video. You can't ask the questions. But they do that sort of, you do it this way, without ever explaining why you do it this way, and you know, whether there's any alternatives. And I found it quite hard to find information about actually the more practical bits of pyrography. I could see how somebody made a picture, but that didn't tell me sort of how do I apply this pen, or why do I do it in that way. You know, it's like if I said to you, you know, when you come to do this thing, move your pen, put it down, lift it off. Alright, you can copy them, but you don't necessarily know why you're doing it. And you then don't, and it's a while before you connect the two. So my way of doing it is to say, this is how I'm doing it. This is, you know, I've made a mistake. This is how I'm thinking of correcting it, or this is what I'm thinking of, so that somebody who was watching me, like I was trying to watch other people, you know, back then, are able to go, oh, okay, now I understand why. So now I can apply it to something else. You know, because I understand why you are drawing the eye that way. I can draw a nose, because the same thing applies, or stuff like that. And that's partly why I talk so much about what I'm actually doing, because of that. And it's it kind of helps me think as well at the same time. Yeah, I think that, I mean, when you try some of these, if you're interested in trying these sorts of things out, getting past that first bit, not necessarily the trial and error, but if you were doing a piece of wood and you kept getting these blobs at the start, you kind of become discouraged, because you can't get, unless you know what's causing it, you can't get rid of it. Whereas if you did it and you saw that now, you go, I remember something about that. That's probably all you'll do. It's something I'm doing. So, and there is a way around it now. You might not remember what that is, but then you are able to either try something different or go and look it up or whatever. But at least you've had that. It's not something that's insurmountable. I don't have to learn to be a rocket scientist to stop that. And that's kind of what I'd like people to sort of take out of it to some extent, as well as just enjoy watching what I'm doing, which isn't a great deal when I talk too much. But unfortunately, it's rather a slow art form, relatively speaking, which I don't know on Twitch. People like things to happen really quickly on Twitch. Somewhat of a more instant conclusion, I think, and some of these art forms like this, which takes quite a while, the carving for example as well, also aren't necessarily particularly popular, because you can watch a whole stream and the effect of the whole stream, maybe this has just changed a bit of colour and not a lot else has happened. What I am doing here is just at the moment, it's just darkening a little bit, just a little bit tentatively, just to have just very slightly, because if I don't try and go too dark, if I just do a very light colouring, I can sort of see the effect here. Maybe it doesn't show up quite so well on camera, but I can sort of start to see the effect and whether it's achieving what I'm intending. Before I start going, a little bit darker, because I think probably I would need to. I am trying something different with these too. I haven't got them. I've done another 2 cat pictures, which were slightly smaller. Were done on oval boards. And I did a different technique for those, where the fur I've actually done as individual lines. This one I want it to do differently, and do it more of a painterly sort of style, which is sort of not individual fur lines as such. It's more sort of shaded colour, which is what I'm doing. But it's a new technique to me, so I'm not quite. I've got a lot to learn. Now that is changing the shape a bit, yeah. I mean, the way I'm seeing this is I've added some colour, which is coming down to here at the moment, from where it was up there. And what it's looking to me like is I'm extending the flat bit of the top of the head here forward, which is kind of what I was after, because it kind of then looks as though it comes along and then dips down this way, as though that's sort of the point at which it rolls over. which is kind of what the sort of thing I was after. Now I need to bring that probably to about here. Now I'm not quite sure whether that's going to work, but I can gradually ease it forward, and I can sort of see how it's doing it. What I need to be careful of is though that I continue to extend it over here as well. I mean, this side of his face, generally speaking, is in shadow when the light source is up here. It's more in shadow than say up here, so I have to remember that this has got to be darker as well, all the way down. Otherwise that's going to throw the face shape off as well. Is that it? There. Just let the camera focus on it a little bit. I've got autofocus on the camera on this at the moment. Getting the cameras right is quite a difficult, with creative. One thing that's different to game broadcasters. Game broadcasters can work with like a lot of light in their face, for example, to light up the face. If I do that, if I'm not careful, you get a heck of a lot of reflections off the artwork, and which makes it worse altogether. That doesn't look as bad on camera. I'm looking at it on a 21-inch monitor, and it actually looks better on the camera than it does here in person. On the monitor. On the monitor, I can see his nose. I can see it come up to his forehead and then curve over the top of his head. In person, it's kind of a little bit, it's sort of more flat straight to here and then curves over the top. 32-inch curved. Oh, you're looking at me on a big screen. I mean, it's 6 feet that way, the screen I'm looking at, so. Yeah, it's too much of a highlight here still, but one of the things I often find with my art, and it's me, is I tend to do 6 foot art, as in it looks better from 6 feet away. You know, pop it up, stand at the other side of the room, and it looks a lot better than when you get close to it. Right. But I think, yeah, if I extend this a little bit and make sure I continue around here, remembering of course that the head is curved as well. We've got the sides, so I have to be careful at the point where it comes around his cheek here and then goes backwards on his face, which is, there is a slightly, well, there's a less distinct, but there is a change in shading from here to go backwards. Just around about here it starts to get darker, which is sort of a cue to your eye or your brain to say, hey, that's going backwards. And I've got to make sure that sort of comes up around, just around the top of the eyes here. That's the skeletal structure, just around there, and into the eye socket. So I've got to watch the transition as we come over the top and down the side here as well. Largely speaking though, I mean, you do have, you'll see a lot of artists that, and I've seen them on YouTube especially, saying you have to study anatomy. You must study anatomy to understand how to draw something. If you're drawing something from memory, purely from memory, so you go, I want to draw a person, how does a person look, and start drawing, then things like anatomy helps, because you know where the bulges should be, which muscles, for example, stand out more than others, where your arm attaches, the fact that your nose is not in the middle of your face. Your eyes are in the middle of your head, and your nose is halfway between your eyes and your chin. Generally speaking, it's that sort of proportion. Which, that's an anatomy thing, because you might remember the kids who have a tendency to draw the nose in the middle of the head, and then it looks weird. And you can't always work out why. Anatomy helps when you're doing something like that from scratch. There's another saying which artists often do, and that is paint what you see, not what you think. And that is, if you're doing something from a reference from real life or from a picture you can see in your head, so you can actually clearly see a picture in your head, your imagination, then do what you see. Forget what you know. Forget how you know a face is structured, what the bones are. Paint what you see. Because often what you know fools you. And you try to paint what you know, but the light's playing tricks on you and it then looks weird. And that's... so there's kind of even with this, it's... I know that the face curves there, but I have to be careful that I don't apply that and therefore get what I know, because I've done it in the past. I know it's supposed to be like that, but actually it's not, and you can study a picture and it doesn't look like that. I don't care whether it actually is in person. It's when you look at it and you go, that looks wrong, even though it's technically might be right, there should be a shadow there, but when you look at a picture you don't see it. And when you see it, it makes it look wrong even though it's right. And so sometimes you actually don't paint, or you don't, in pyrography terms, you don't apply pyrography to what's actually there. You do what looks right, not necessarily what is right. I mean, a lot of people, I've had quite a few people that say they can't draw, for example. You cannot, if they couldn't draw a cat. And when that, and I'm just using cat as an example here, but I go, okay, you can't draw a cat. So look at that there, look at what's in the space there. So you've got this oval thing, and you've got a bit of a line and a bit of a line there. You say you can't draw that. Yeah, I can draw that. Okay. What's there? Oh, well, that's just a curve and a... All right. Well, you can draw. Yeah, you can draw that. All right. And you. What's that? It's just a bit of a script. Okay. And you've worked it out by now. Of course, you can move this all around the picture, and eventually, you've drawn a cat. But you didn't actually draw a cat, you just draw shapes, and that's one of the things that people who are starting to start drawing or whatever, or start to think, they'll look at a complex image like this and go, I can't ever draw that. Draw the shapes that you can see, do them in small sections, and you surprise yourself as to what you can actually do. And okay, bits might not line up the first few times, but you've done it a few times by then, so you start to know you can do this. And then it's a matter of practice. And I often do it, I do it with pyrography or the scraper board. I've done it as well. I look at an image and go, oh, how on earth do I start that? How can I do that? And I have that sort of confidence. Can I actually do that? And what I end up doing is I'll go, well, I tell you what, let's just start. I'll start with the ear, and I'll start, I'll do something like that, and then, okay, well, let's do this other ear. So now I've done two ears. Well, let's just join them together with this bit, and I'll come down here. Okay, well, the body and I just do this. I do a bit, and I'll just extend it a little bit, and extend it a bit more, and then all of a sudden I've got the whole face in. I tend to start with the eyes myself, but it's the same sort of thing. I'll start with the eyes and I'll work out from it to the nose, and then down to the mouth, and up to the ears, and gradually extend out, and suddenly I've got a whole image. and you kind of almost surprise yourself because it just appears. When you do it over several sessions, you actually see it. But you start with an eye, and then you move out a little bit, and at the end of the session, when you actually stand back and look at it, you think, oh, wow, I've actually done quite a bit. I always start with the eyes, by the way, because one of the things I've found is if you can't get the eyes right, if you don't get the eyes right, forget it, start again. If I haven't got something that looks like eyes correct, and I'm still not quite sure about this one, but if I've not something that hasn't got the eyes right, by the time I've sort of done a reasonable amount on the eyes, and they do not look right, at that point I go, it is not worth continuing, because they never are going to be right. And if the eyes aren't right, because the eyes are what you look at. The first time you saw this, I'm sure the first thing you noticed was the eyes. It's the focal point for everybody. And if they look odd to you, you don't look at the rest. And so if I haven't got the eyes right, I don't waste time doing the rest. At one time I used to do all the rest and do the eyes last, because it was sort of I'm scared of them. I've got to get them right, and I daren't do it. But once I've done all the rest and that looks good, okay, well, I've got confidence to try the eyes. The only problem is if you mess up the eyes, you've just wasted the rest. And so now I kind of do it the other way. I work out if I'm going to waste the time before I waste it. And I'm not 100% sure about this one, but it's not too bad. So I'm kind of okay to carry on with it at the moment. Right, this area is too light. I'm not going to be going on. In fact, I've gone for a little bit just because I've actually spent about half of this stream talking and not actually applying heat to wood. But it is getting towards the close of the stream. So I hope it's kind of been fun for you Mudkippers. Thank you for dropping in, and it's as the person broadcasting, it's a heck of a lot more fun to have someone around who is, at least before I dig that hole any deeper, who is interacting rather nicely. It makes it a lot nicer to explain things, and I'm not repeating myself and things like that. So thank you for being here this evening. Now I'm accidentally starting to create this, starting in one position. I'm starting to create a line there. Just that. It might not be visible, but I can see it here, and that is because I've been starting in the same place without realizing it. And so what I've got to do now is just shade a little bit around it, just to get rid of the line that I was starting to develop. So I'm recognizing it early before it becomes more pronounced, and it's easier to fix at this stage than if I'd suddenly got done a lot and I'd got a really more pronounced line. Either that, or I pass it off as a marking on his fur. one of the other things I have to be a little bit careful of is with the music. This one isn't so bad, but there has been tracks in the past where the beat is just such that I find myself applying the pyrography to the beat, which sometimes is okay, but sometimes it means that it doesn't quite work as you intended it to work. You do have to be a little bit careful if you're playing music in the background. And I'm not sure it's going to come over, but one of talking as I was earlier of techniques and doing things, one of the things like with fur, for example, here, and it applies to other things where there is a distinct sort of direction. So grass, maybe, for example, which is, or wheat in a field, for example, it's laid down. If you're applying pyrography to resemble it, and the cat's fur is one of it here, where the fur goes, as you'll know, the fur goes from a point here, it radiates out all the way from just above the point of the bridge of the nose here. And one of the things that helps enormously when you're doing, whether you were painting, pencil or whatever, is making your strokes in the direction of the fur, so whichever the fur direction is. So if I'm over here, I'm not doing it this way, I'm actually doing it away from that central point, or whichever point it is that the fur is coming from, because you do, no matter how hard you really try, and you'll always get slight tooling marks, and I describe it as tooling marks, but it's sort of distinct lines that perceptually you can see. You might not actually notice them, but you're actually seeing them, and your brain is sort of interpreting them as a direction. And so if you see them on the head, your brain is expecting them to go that way. If they're going that way, your brain will be going, what's going on here? And you notice something's odd. You can't always tell what it is, but you notice something's odd. So one of the things, that's partly why I'm turning the board around here, so that I can actually go in the fur direction. And you might notice I'm doing this at this point here. The fur direction is that way, because that's how it looks. And now in practice, on a real pussycat, the fur would be towards his nose, it'd be coming up and over. But if you imagine it comes up and over, and you can see where my finger's pointing. And that's one thing where you know the fur should come from this point, but you forget it's a three-dimensional object. And so if you draw what you see, which is the fur that way, rather than what you think you know, which is the fur comes from there, over the top of his head, which is true, but it does it in a somewhat convoluted fashion. That's another thing about drawing it using the tool, not only to draw what you see rather than what you know, but actually to get the tooling marks to agree with what your eye thinks it should see. At which point that's starting to work. So I'm kind of happy with that. At which point I'm going to say that's going to be it for now. And whilst I remember, I'm going to turn that off, because I have a habit of leaving that on. And it's relatively safe. The tools are in a holder, but it's a hot tool. Like, not only is it wasting electricity, there's always a possibility of something might get charred on it, which is not a good idea. Especially hair, by the way. If you ever get hair on a pyrography tool, you'll know about it. It does not smell very pleasant at all in the least. So for anybody that's watching, one of the things is, as I've mentioned a few times in the last few streams, with some things that are to do with work, I am not going to be able to stream for at least a week, probably 2 weeks. I will come back as soon as I am able to do so. But I'm definitely won't be streaming tomorrow, for example. I know that's not going to be possible. So I'd recommend you obviously follow if you're watching, so you get the notification from Twitch. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get some tweets, because I will tweet when I'm about to start again. And I'm not a prolific tweeter, so if you don't like your feed being full of what people had for breakfast, then you're safe with me. I don't tell you what I have for breakfast, partly because I don't have breakfast. But I'm just not that sort of tweeter. If you'd like to see, whilst I'm not able to stream, if you'd like to see some of the very early streams, and I mean 2 years ago, when I first started streaming, it's a completely different style. Well, it's not a completely different style, I'm just less confident on camera than I am now. Then they are gradually going up on YouTube, youtube.com/surrogateart. Take a look. They're in real time, complete with all the chat that goes on and the fact that I'm talking. And even back then, I stopped doing whilst I was talking. I do it less now, but I'm still I'm not. Can't do two things at once. I'm a fella. I can only do one thing at once. I would encourage you. Well, I would, because it's my shop, but I'd encourage you to take a look at the shop. surrogateart.etsy.com for things like chainmail. The pictures that are being shown on the right hand side, the third panel down, all the pictures on there are stuff that's being done on the stream. And jewellery like this is available from the shop if you like them. I think they look great, and I think they make great Christmas presents for people. For example, and if you like Christmas jewellery, the red, gold, green and purple, those four colours are fantastic Christmas colours. Take a look at them. They're lovely, shiny, rich colours, and so jewellery in sort of any of those combinations often looks really good. Or if you want some summer pieces, the gold and silver together are let's say yellow colour more than the gold, should I say, but they're a fantastic sort of summer colour. I know we're end of summer now, but there's next year. And I can't go without saying about my own website. Take a look at that. I've got a lot of work to do on it, but it gives a little bit more information about the arts that you've seen done on stream, like pyrography, the pieces that are completed, like sunset, salute to sunset. It'll tell you a little bit more about it, and about some of the, what pyrography is and how it's done. I'm going to say thank you. Thank you very much, Mudkippers. I think they're gorgeous as well. I suppose I really ought to say, if you'd like to consider helping the stream out, because daft as it sounds, wood doesn't grow on trees. So it's an English saying, wood doesn't grow on trees. It doesn't, it is trees. But the point about that saying is, it's not as cheap as it sounds. Wood is a relatively expensive thing, as is some of the tools and things that you see used on stream. So if anybody has an interest or would like to support the stream, things like the subscription button up there do help out, because the money can go towards buying things that are used and do on stream. So some of the things like the punch craft, for example, is a relatively expensive thing to do, so I don't do it very often because of that. A bobbin of thread, and we could go through sort of about 15 bobbins to do a 12-inch round image. They're about £1 to £2 a piece, so the costs sort of add up. So yeah, it means you see more pyrography. So if you like pyrography, well, I've got a lot of practice wood down here. This sort of stuff. Okay, you don't get as many colours on it, but I've got a lot of this lying around. So you might see a lot more of that sort of stuff. But anyway, thanks everybody. Hope I'll be back as soon as I can, sometime within the next 2 weeks. As I say, keep an eye out on Twitter or Twitch notification. It will be, when I do manage to get back to it, it will be at the normal sort of time, 7 till 8 PM, somewhere between 7 and 8 PM UK time, which is about 1800 to 1900 UTC or GMT. Have a great time, everybody. Sorry I won't be around for a little bit. Unfortunately, I have to work. Bye for now.